Zainab was only 6 years old when her world crumbled before her eyes. The sound of her mother's cries echoed through the walls of their small apartment in Lagos as her father, Baba Zainab, stormed out of the house for the last time. He had found another woman, another life that did not include his little girl. As the door slammed shut, a silence heavier than thunder filled the home. Zainab clung to her mother's wrapper, her tiny hands trembling, eyes wide with confusion. Life after the divorce was a blur of struggle and loneliness. Her mother, Asma, worked tirelessly to make ends meet, taking on multiple jobs to keep food on the table. The small one-bedroom apartment they moved into was cramped and hot, the air thick with the scent of struggle. Zainab missed the warmth of her father's presence, his deep laugh that once filled their home, and the strong arms that lifted her high into the air. But as much as she fought to hold on to the memory of him, his absence became an aching void she could not fill. Then came Uncle Suleiman, her mother's new husband. He was charming, kind, at least in the beginning. He showered Zainab with gifts, called her my precious jewel, and told her she was the daughter he never had. He would take her out for ice cream, braid her hair, while humming old Yoruba songs, and tell her that she was special. But in the shadows, when her mother was at work, his hands lingered too long, his eyes held a darkness she did not understand. At first, she thought she was imagining things, but as she grew older, the feeling of unease never left her. When Uncle Suleiman's business flourished, everything changed. They moved from their cramped apartment to a grand house in one of the wealthiest parts of Lagos. Zainab was in awe of the polished marble floors, the high ceilings, and the enormous garden that seemed to stretch endlessly. She finally had her own room, decorated in soft pinks and lavenders, with a chandelier that sparkled like the stars. She spent the first few nights twirling in front of the full-length mirror, imagining a life where she was a princess, where everything was perfect. At first, she was happy. The new life was dazzling. The house was filled with laughter, the dining table stacked with exotic dishes, and the air filled with the scent of luxury. She had new clothes, shoes with shiny buckles, and maids who addressed her as Miss Zainab. Her mother smiled more, finally able to breathe without the weight of financial burden crushing her shoulders. Everything seemed perfect, but it didn't take long for the excitement to wear off. The big house was just a bigger prison. Uncle Suleiman still watched her with those same hungry eyes. He still called her to his study late at night. The wealth and luxury meant nothing. She felt emptier than ever, trapped in a golden cage where no one could hear her silent screams. The grandeur of her surroundings mocked her pain. No matter how many gifts he gave her, they could not erase the filth of his touch, the suffocating fear that gripped her every time they were alone. Her mother, oblivious to the horrors lurking behind closed doors, continued to sing praises of the new life they had been given. "We are blessed, Zainab," she would say, caressing her daughter's hair. But Zainab never felt blessed. She felt cursed. At 15, Zainab longed for an escape. She found it in the arms of older men who whispered sweet lies in her ears. They told her she was beautiful, that she was special, that they would never leave her. She wanted to believe them. She needed to believe them. With every stolen kiss, every forbidden touch, she felt a fleeting sense of worth. But it was never enough. She craved more, an insatiable hunger for validation that no man could truly satisfy. Her mother never noticed. She was too busy surviving, working late shifts, and trusting Uncle Suleiman to watch over Zainab. And he did, always watching, always waiting. But she was older now, wiser. She knew how to lock doors, how to stay away, how to pretend she wasn't afraid. But the damage was already done. Zainab became addicted to the thrill of being wanted. The attention of men filled the hollow spaces inside her, even if only temporarily. She knew what she was doing was wrong, but it felt good. It felt powerful. And so, she continued, sinking deeper into a world that only saw her as an object of desire. Zainab was the most beautiful girl in her high school. Her radiant skin, hypnotic eyes, and graceful walk made her the envy of her peers. The boys adored her, the girls wanted to be her, and the teachers praised her intelligence. But behind the confidence, the popularity, and the alluring smiles, she was a broken girl searching for something she could not name. Among all the boys who admired her, there was one who truly loved her, Kunal. He was kind, patient, and treated her like a queen. He was her first serious boyfriend, the one who made her believe love could be real. He wrote her poems, held her hand like she was delicate, and made her laugh until her stomach hurt. With him, she felt safe, something she had not felt in a long time. But even with his devotion, something inside her was restless. One evening, when Kunal was away for a family trip, she found herself alone with his best friend, Tund. He was charming in a dangerous way, the type of boy who knew exactly what to say to weaken her defenses. It started with an innocent conversation, then a lingering touch, then a kiss she did not pull away from. Before she knew it, she had betrayed the one person who had ever truly loved her. When Kunal found out, he was shattered. He looked at her with eyes full of pain, disbelief, and disappointment. Why, was all he asked. She had no answer. The betrayal haunted her, but she did not stop. She couldn't stop. She was drowning in a sea of self-destruction, reaching for anything that made her feel whole, even if only for a moment. The shame of what she had done to Kunal followed Zainab like a dark cloud. She avoided his gaze in the hallways, but the weight of his silence crushed her. She knew she had broken something that could never be fixed. The whispers in school spread quickly. The once adored beauty was now the subject of gossip and judgment. Some girls envied her audacity, others pitied Kunal. The boys, however, saw an opportunity. They knew she was weak, desperate, seeking something that would never be found in their arms. And so, they came one after the other, each one leaving her emptier than the last. Her grades slipped, but no one seemed to notice. Even her mother, lost in her world of work and obligations, barely saw her anymore. The only person who still watched her was Uncle Suleiman. His gaze lingered too long, his presence too suffocating. But Zainab had learned to escape in her own way. She found solace in late-night parties, in the taste of alcohol that numbed the ache inside her, in the temporary thrill of reckless abandon. Asma's job as an administrative officer at the university meant she often worked late. It was during one of these late shifts that fate nearly threw her into the arms of a man she once loved. Baba Zainab, now a well-respected professor, walked the same halls she did. She had caught a glimpse of him once from afar, his hair graying, his stature just as proud as she remembered. She had turned away before he could see her, her heart hammering in her chest. She had once dreamed of seeing him again, of confronting him, of asking him why he had abandoned them. But now, after all these years, she realized she did not want the answers anymore. She only wanted to forget. Little did she know that her past and her daughter's present were about to collide in a way that would shatter everything. Zainab's university years were a blur of poor choices and desperate attempts to silence the demons of her past. She partied harder, drank more, and took risks that would have terrified her younger self. But beneath the facade of confidence, she was lost. Then she met Professor Ibrahim. Charming, intelligent, with a kind of power that made her feel seen. He was different from the boys she had known. He had influence, experience. When he spoke, she listened, and when he offered her a way to secure her grades, she did not hesitate. Their affair was passionate, secretive, and intoxicating. She did not love him, but she needed him. And he, unaware of the twisted fate that bound them, needed her too. Then, she missed her period. Panic set in. The test confirmed her fears. Pregnant. Her mind spiraled. She could not keep it. She had to tell him. And so, one evening, she sat in his office, her hand shaking as she whispered, "Professor, I'm pregnant." The color drained from his face. His fingers trembled as he removed his glasses. "Zainab, we need to talk." But nothing could have prepared her for what came next. Zainab sat frozen in the professor's office, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. She had expected anger, denial, maybe even a demand for her to get rid of the pregnancy. But what she saw on Professor Ibrahim's face was something far worse: horror. He rubbed his forehead, his hands shaking. "Zainab, this cannot be happening," he muttered. He looked at her as though he had seen a ghost, his lips parted in disbelief. "I can take care of it," she said quickly, not wanting to deal with whatever fear was gripping him. "I just thought you should know." He shook his head, his breath uneven. "You don't understand. Zainab, tell me your mother's full name." She frowned, confused. "Asma Bello." The professor's eyes widened. He slumped back into his chair, covering his mouth with his hand. His entire body seemed to tremble. "Professor?" she asked, growing more uneasy by the second. He swallowed hard, looking at her with eyes full of guilt and something else she could not name. "Zainab, I think I might be your father." The world stopped. Everything inside her shattered in an instant. The air in the room became suffocating. Her breath hitched as the words settled into her mind. No, that's not possible," she whispered, shaking her head. I left your mother many years ago. I had no idea she had a daughter. If I had known, he knew he was lying." She could no longer hear him. She could barely breathe. The floor beneath her seemed to shift, and before she knew it, she was running, out of the office, down the hallway, into the cold night air. Her own father, the man who abandoned her, the man who slept with her, the father of her unborn child. Zainab did not know how she got back to her hostel room. She locked the door, sank to the floor, and let out a guttural scream. Tears poured down her face as she rocked back and forth, her hands gripping her hair. She had spent her whole life searching for love, for validation, only to end up here, in the most horrifying nightmare imaginable. She threw up twice, her stomach convulsing from the shock. The room spun around her, and the weight of reality crushed her. She wanted to erase everything, to make it all go away. She reached for the bottle of alcohol sitting on her desk and gulped it down, hoping to drown the monster inside her. But the pain only grew sharper, more unbearable. Her phone buzzed, messages from friends, from classmates, even from Kunnel, who she had betrayed. None of them mattered. She was alone, truly, utterly alone. By morning, the campus was buzzing with rumors. Somehow, the secret was out. People stared, whispered, pointed at her as she walked by. She felt like a corpse moving through a world that no longer welcomed her. And then came the drugs. The only thing that could silence the screaming inside her head. Zainab lost herself in a haze of alcohol and pills. Nights blurred into days, and days into nights, an endless cycle of intoxication and regret. She barely attended lectures, barely ate, barely slept. The only time she felt remotely alive was when she was high, when the world felt distant and unreal. Her so-called friends abandoned her. Even the ones who once adored her beauty and charm now looked at her with disgust or pity. The whispers followed her everywhere. She slept with her own father. She's pregnant with her father's child. How could she not know? The shame was unbearable. She stopped looking in mirrors, unable to face her reflection. It no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the girl everyone mocked. The girl who had fallen lower than anyone thought possible. Kunnel tried to reach her. He sent messages, knocked on her door, begged her to talk to him. But she ignored him. What could she possibly say? That she had ruined everything? That she had betrayed him? Betrayed herself? That she wished she had never been born? Then one night she overdosed. The news spread like wildfire. Zainab had been found unconscious in her hostel, barely breathing. Someone had called an ambulance just in time. If they had waited any longer, she would have died. Asma arrived at the hospital in a frenzy, her heart pounding in terror. When she saw her daughter lying lifeless on the hospital bed, hooked up to machines, her face pale and sunken, she broke down. "My baby," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "What have they done to you?" The doctors assured her that Zainab would survive, but the damage ran deeper than her body. The real wounds were in her soul. When Zainab finally opened her eyes, she saw her mother sitting by her side, her face weary, her eyes red. There was no anger, no disappointment, only heartbreak. "Zainab," Asma said softly, brushing her fingers through her daughter's tangled hair. "Talk to me." Zainab turned her head away, silent. What was there to say? Her mother would never understand. But Asma did understand. More than Zainab realized. She had spent years hiding her own pain, pretending that the past didn't haunt her. But it did. And now, her daughter was suffering for the sins of a man they both wished they could forget. Zainab was discharged a week later, but things did not get better. The university threatened to expel her. The scandal had grown too big, and the administration did not want to deal with the mess. Her professors whispered about her classmates avoided her, and even those who once wanted to be associated with her fame now wanted nothing to do with her disgrace. The walls of the world closed in around her. Nowhere felt safe. Nowhere felt like home. And so, she made a decision. One that would silence everything forever. Zainab stared at the small, dimly lit room that had become her prison. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating her, reminding her that no matter how far she tried to run, the past always found her. The whispers, the stares, the judgment, it was all too much. She sat at her desk, a blank sheet of paper before her, the pen trembling in her hand. If there was one last thing she could control, it was this, her final words. The world had called her many things, beautiful, popular, a whore, a disgrace. But none of them had seen the broken girl beneath it all. None of them had truly known her. With a deep, shuddering breath, she began to write. To the world that never loved me, I tried. I tried so hard to find happiness, to feel wanted, to belong. But I was always alone, even in a crowded room, even in the arms of men who whispered empty promises. No one saw me, not really. To my mother, I am sorry. I was never the daughter you deserved. But I hope you know I loved you, even when I couldn't show it. I hope one day you will forgive me. To Kunnel, I never deserved your love. I ruined the only good thing I had. But please, remember me for who I was before I lost myself. And to him, my father, my nightmare, may the guilt of what you did to me haunt you forever. She folded the letter neatly, placed it on the table, and stood up. The weight of her decision felt strangely light. There was no fear, no second thoughts, only silence. The next morning, a janitor found her lifeless body in the university's abandoned library. The bottle of pills lay empty beside her. The letter, still sitting untouched on the table, was discovered by a lecturer who had once admired her brilliance. The news spread like wildfire. Students whispered in hushed tones. Professors spoke of wasted potential. Some cried, some merely shrugged. But no one would ever forget her name. Asma collapsed upon hearing the news, her screams echoing through the hospital corridors where she had once prayed for her daughter's survival. She held Zainab's letter in trembling hands, reading each word through a flood of tears. The pain was unbearable, crushing her from the inside. She had lost her child, and there was no way to bring her back. Kunnel, upon hearing the news, locked himself in his room for days, unable to process the loss. He blamed himself. Maybe if he had tried harder, maybe if he had held on longer, he could have saved her. But now it was too late. And as for Professor Ibrahim, her father, her predator, he disappeared from the university overnight. Some say he left the country. Others say he could not live with his shame. But wherever he went, he carried with him the weight of a sin too dark to ever be forgiven. Zainab's story became a cautionary tale,